Melbourne shutdown really did hit the markets, didn't it?
It did, Tiki. Admittedly, not as hard as probably some had expected. And this has been the debate for probably not just Australia, but globally, is that if you look at markets across the world, not just here on the ASX, those that are listed have tended to steer through these issues better than obviously what we're hearing on on the ground, those mum and dad corner stores, those small startups that are clearly going to face a very, very tough time. And that does feed into it to some extent, and why you're alluding to that 2.5% decline we saw for the week. But if you have a look at something like the Aussie dollar, I think is another way to answer your question. It initially wavered, but then actually basically gained ground again. So there's a big argument about this as well, is that we know what a lockdown looks like. The uncertainty that came through March, through May, particularly in April, isn't maybe as strong this time. The other difference this time is that JobKeeper, JobSeeker are actually in place, and people understand that, because probably the best answer to you is that if confidence goes, markets will go.
Yeah.
And confidence hasn't gone yet.
I'll come to the bank's role this week in a minute. But what you're saying is that really Victoria, Melbourne, the Melbourne shutdown, the market is, not taking it in its stride, but certainly not as worried. Because, I mean, politically, if you look at the columns, you're seeing a lot of nervousness about just the ability to get on top of this in Victoria.
Yeah, and look, the health outcome will clearly answer that question, and I completely agree with that. So until you do start to see a decline in numbers, seeing Victoria back below triple digits, that the actual lockdowns that have taken place in the last week, which probably won't start coming out into the numbers, listening to the experts, until the end of this week at earliest. Once that, that part of it. But again, if you look at Victoria in isolation, if you look at the reactions of other states and how they're handling this whole scenario, the market has a reason to possibly be mindful, be wary, certainly have a slightly risk-off view. But if you look at the overall picture about how they responded to what happened this week, they were relatively sanguine to the whole scenario from the point of view, as I said, that confidence is the key to this. So, if the overall market loses confidence, then the market will go with it. So far, it hasn't.
So, as you say, Philip, for confidence really was the banks coming out with their side of the answer to this problem, getting through the recovery with the deferral of a lot of these interest payments and loans until next year now. Did that give the market also a window on what regulators would do and indeed what the government will do?
Yes, it did. I think you've also got to look at, though, the additional 4 months in terms of the actual nitty-gritty stuff. And I know you've had an interview with Matt Commons, so I won't comment too much on it. But what I mean by that is that the 6 months that are currently going with deferments versus the 4 months additional, they're slightly different. And the one I would point to here is what Ross McEwen said during the week, which is that he is clearly saying from the NAB perspective, we will sit down with borrowers, we will talk to them. But he's alluding to the idea that if you can start paying your mortgage, you should. If you're in a scenario, though, where you need to renegotiate for another 4 months, there will be some of those that actually fall out of bank lending. They actually need to look at other options. And unfortunately, there will also be some that just can't come back. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit like what we're listing and the leakage we're getting from the government around the end of the September cliff, as everybody's called it, around what job, insert buzzword, job handover, whatever the hell it's going to be with regards to post-JobKeeper, that it will be different. It will be more targeted. It will certainly have, probably means testing to it, listening to what you're hearing from them as well. So it's not the same. There will be handovers. There will certainly be government support, and the banking support is clearly there, but it's not exactly identical. I think the market likes that because obviously the amount of deferments starts to create issues around bad and doubtful debts. It also starts to really impact overall returns. Yes. And that is a problem. And then even today, you saw some big, in the 9 newspapers today, you did actually see that, you're starting to hear from the corporate regulator. They're also getting a little bit worried that this deferment program actually ends up backing up onto the mortgage holder themselves, who should be paying because they can afford to, but also the risk that it's creating at the other end of the candle, which is the idea that there are people being deferred that are actually going to find themselves in real trouble once this gets released.
So, in the context of all of this, Evan, and in the sort of deferral of payments bubble, we've got Afterpay, which just is heading for the stratosphere, isn't it?
Yeah, and you use the word bubble there. I'm not going to use that word. The word I'm going to use is we've gone from optimistic buying to probably hysterical buying. When I've sort of looked at the way of describing it, it feels a little bit like Blackmore's about 2-3 years ago when they moved into China. That went from being an exuberance buying to, basically, as I said, hysterical buying. Even Blackmore's at the time came out and said that we're probably overvalued when they hit $200 at the time. And look, Afterpay is clearly in the right space. Your buy now, pay laters has been absolutely accelerated during this period where online purchasing now is becoming not just the up and comer, it's now the norm. And it's overtaken at a speed, and I'll use your word, stratospheric speed, that normally in economics takes several years, possibly even a decade. We knew it was coming, it was starting to happen, but this lockdown has caused globally a structural shift. Now, Afterpay clearly is one of the most popular ways to use online purchasing because it's not credit cards per se. It is a form of credit. Let's put it out there. So all that's there. But when you see an $800 million raising like they did, the original owners selling down a significant chunk and the over-exuberant buying, and that's the deliberate word that's been going on, particularly in the last 4 weeks. Even, they're up, almost 180% since May.
Yes.
That gets me concerned that people aren't actually doing their due diligence and looking at them. Are they actually?
All right. Well,
they're a company moving revenue, but not enough.
We'll keep an eye on them. Evan Lucas, as always, thank you so much for all your insights. It's great.